Hello, and welcome to another episode of Conscious Conversations. Conscious Conversations is a podcast and global community of self-healers, cycle breakers, and new earth leaders. Here we empower you to have uncomfortable conversations and show you deep healing through communication. As we collectively bring our awareness to our own triggers, habits, traumas, and soul's inner wisdom today, I am so excited to share with you guys because we have a very special guest. Yael is a globally acknowledged as a leading expert in the field of nutrigenomics. In 2000, she was part of the team that built the first lifestyle genetics test, and since then has been responsible for building many others. She is the author of 4 books, The Power of Genetics, It's Not Just Your Genes to Plate, and SNP Journal. She's also been published in multiple peer-reviewed scientific journals, hosts the Power of Genetics podcast, and is highly regarded speaker in genetics. She's also built the first online nutrigenomics platform for clinician education and has developed and supervised genomics courses around the world. She has trained thousands of healthcare practitioners globally, also teaching at Rutgers University and the Maryland University of Integrative Health. And then in 2018, she also founded 3x4 Genetics and now serves as its Chief Science Officer. Welcome. We are so happy to have you here today.
Hey, Daria, thanks for inviting me. I love your intro around conscious conversations and healing. So I'm super excited for having this conversation today.
Likewise. And I actually discovered Yael through the Integrative Nutrition School, which is so amazing because there was a module in there and I really love everything that she spoke into. So I felt really inspired to invite her on for an episode and ask her all about genetics. Today, we are going to be speaking a lot into epigenetics and genetics. So can you tell us a little bit about how you even got really into this and what drives your passion for the work that you do?
I never set out to be a scientist is really the most important thing. I never took science at school. I did art, history, English. I had no intention of ever working in a science space. And in fact, I studied architecture. And then my gran got diagnosed with cancer and it was very end stage. And I was devastated. She was my primary caregiver. She was definitely the most nurturing person in my life. And I couldn't believe watching her die from this cancer. None of the doctors had answers for me. They couldn't tell me why she got the cancer. They couldn't tell me how we could have prevented it. They couldn't tell me how to manage her cancer better. It was just awful. So she died after, it was about 3 months. And during that time, I was rushing back between university, architecture, and my gran. And I really had this kind of epiphany sitting by her side of, this is just not okay, that we don't understand and we need answers. So I left architecture pretty much straight after she passed and went looking for answers. And it was very hard. I'm a whole lot older than you, and to find anything that would give meaningful answers about health. And so I landed up becoming a dietitian, which was the closest thing I could find. And that was pretty horrible and didn't have answers for me. This was quite a few decades ago, so dietetics has improved a lot, but still did not have the kind of understanding of what could we have done better to prevent cancer. And so disillusioned with dietetics, I kept on searching and looking, and I was living in London at the time and met this extraordinary woman. And most of my career has based on this conversation of every 3-4 years, I meet an extraordinary mentor. And for me, it's always been women. It doesn't have to be, but it has been. And she was a geneticist. And she had this dream that nutrition and genetics was going to be the future of medicine. And this is in the year 2000. So she was so ahead of the game. And I remember looking at her going, don't be ridiculous. There's no relationship between genetics and nutrition. But I was searching and there was something about what she was telling me that really intrigued me. And the long story short is I landed up joining her, even though I knew nothing about genetics, working with her in the first company that ever built a genetic test like this. And then was so inspired, I went back to university and got a PhD in genetics. And it was really in those years of working and studying in my PhD did I come to understand that this relationship between nutrition and genetics was really, and not just nutrition, it's lifestyle, it's exposure, it's stress, it's trauma, was really going to change the way we practice medicine, nutrition, and everything. And so that's 24 years. But then I think the beginning is the most important. And I always say it took about 15 years in the career of nutrition genetics before I felt like I had closed the loop on my gran, on why she died, what we could have done to prevent the cancer, how we could have managed the cancer. So it was a long journey, but yeah, it was very inspiring.
Yeah, my condolences. And, I feel like oftentimes we can overlook or oversee our health and not take things from a preventative lens at times. Instead of getting to that root cause, like we often wait until something happens or wait until the rock bottom. It's like, what if we didn't even have to hit that rock bottom in order to awaken or have our own breakthrough of some sort? So can you speak into the term genetic destiny? So I studied biomedical sciences. I studied also genetics when I was studying biomedical sciences. And when I learned about epigenetics, also something that IAN also teaches, I was fascinated because I'm like, wow, this all makes sense now. Like I understand how there are other things, environmental factors that can affect what genes are triggered in my body. And so can you speak into the concept of genetic destiny and then how it's evolved with the advancements of genetics in the space?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting term, genetic destiny. And I have to say it's not a term that I use. I'm gonna refrain from it, but because I think it's a bit of a loaded term. And this idea, I think my issue with it is that what it does is it makes people feel like their genetics is their destiny.
Yep.
And what we call like genetic determinism, that your genetics determines your health and your future. Actually, these classes are irritating. So I'm going to redefine it. And what I'm going to do for anyone listening to your podcast is I'm going to define the concept of genetics, and then I'm going to define the concept of epigenetics, because I never like these two conversations to happen separately. I always think about genetics and epigenetics as yin and yang, that they go together and they together define health. So I'm going to give you my kind of 2-minute version of it. Okay. So we're going to start off by understanding the concept of genetics. So we have cells, trillions of cells in our body, and in each cell we have a nucleus, and in this nucleus lives our DNA. And it's basically these 23 pairs of chromosomes that are beautifully wrapped in an incredible engineering feat. And when we unravel them, what we actually see is a code. So DNA is a code or language. So like English has 26 letters. And when you take English letters and you put them together, you make words. You put the words together, you make sentences. You put sentences together, you get paragraphs and stories. Genetics is actually the same. So we have 4 letters in genetics: an A, a T, a G, and a C. And that's what your DNA is, really, just all this code. Let's think of computer code streaming out. And the way it works is every time you take 3 of these letters and put them together, they make something called a codon, which basically codes for an amino acid. And what happens when we put a bunch of amino acids together, I think everyone knows this answer, is you get a protein. And what drives our body is proteins. It's enzymes, it's hormones, it's brain messages, right? So DNA is coding for amino acids, which is making proteins, which is making enzymes and hormones, which is driving how our body works. So now what happens with this code? At 99.9% of us, between us, our code is identical. But at 0.1%, our code is different from each other. So I might have a T, you might have an A, our code differs. So what happens when the code differs is when it makes these amino acids and proteins, it can change the way the protein works, which means that when the protein changes, that can mean the enzyme is working faster, the enzyme is working slower. It can say where the enzyme's working, how much the hormone's working. So these changes, and I love to call them spelling changes because that's all they are, is a spelling change in our DNA, can determine how our body works differently. So I always define genetics as we use genetics to gain insight about who we are and how we respond to the world around us. And that means how we respond to diet, to lifestyle, environmental exposure, to stress, to trauma, to exercise, you name it. And so when we do a genetic test, we can gain that insight about that 0.1% and why we're different. So that's genetics. Now I'm going to talk about epigenetics. So epi means above. So epigenetics is everything that is above genetics. So when we use the word epigenetics, we're not talking about our DNA code, which we're born with and we die with, right? And that's, I think, when you talk about genetic destiny, it's the code we have is what we're born with and we die with. It doesn't change. But the thing about epigenetics is where the change happens. So epigenetics is gene expression, how genes switch on and switch off. And everything that happens in our body, every microsecond of every minute of every day, is genes are switching on and off. So when we are exposed to something, so say we go to Beijing and we're surrounded by pollution, our genes are going to be switched on by the pollution to try and manage this toxin influx. And they're going to switch on all the detox genes to try to clear it. We're going to switch on a bunch of inflammatory genes in response to the toxin. So every single thing we are exposed to will change the way our genes switch on and off. And there's also good stuff, right? So when we eat a beautiful salad full of greens and orange and purple vegetables, the nutrients inside those vegetables are going to switch on genes in a positive way. They're probably going to switch off our inflammatory genes and help our detox genes. Okay. So the thing about the choices we make in our life is we can decide what to eat, where to go, how to expose ourselves, what exercise to do. And every decision we make is going to switch on and switch off genes. So the world of genetics is that yin and yang. It's know yourself to understand who you are and how you respond to the world around you. And then you can make extremely informed decisions to be able to optimize the way genes switch on and off, to be able to manage that insight that you gained about who you are. So that is the beautiful world of genetics and epigenetics.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for explaining that and sharing that. And I love that the analogy, like when you said this, I just felt like the imagery in my head go like a switch. Like epigenetics is like a switch, like a light switch. And so you're saying like our environment, our nutrition, the choices that we make every single day will switch those genes on and off. Now, in terms of genetic testing, how does somebody know whether a genetic test is trustworthy or not? How does someone shop for a genetic test? When should someone get tested? All those questions I'm sure that you get all the time.
Yeah, there was a lot of questions just in what you said, but let's go back to, so when can you get tested? So literally you can be tested from the day you're born until the day you die. You remember your DNA is not going to change. So we always say you really want to get those answers as young as possible, because chronic disease takes 10, 20, 30, 40 years to build, right? You don't wake up in the morning with cancer or wake up in the morning with heart disease. It's when your body is acting in a dysfunctional way over time, you will develop the symptoms of those diseases. So we said get tested as young as possible. Second thing is, I don't know if you asked this, but I'm going to answer it anyway, is who should get a genetic test, right? So I always bucket it into 4 groups to make sense of it. So the first group would be optimal health, right? We want to live the best life. We want to personalize our lives as much as we can so that the choices we're making to be healthy are all like about us, not about you. Remember, we're different at that 0.1%. Anti-aging, disease prevention. So that's bucket 1, right? Bucket 2 is weight. The weight journey is so different for everyone. So for some individuals, it's so easy to gain weight, really hard to lose weight, hungry all the time, I don't feel full, snacking, binge eating. Like genetics is going to impact all those things I just said. And if we understand our genes, we can understand our weight journey so much better, because it's absolutely different for everyone. So that's bucket 2. Bucket 3 is chronic disease. So I'm now have the disease, autoimmune, cardiovascular, diabetes, obesity, like any of those, right? Long haul COVID. So how do I understand, one, why I got ill in the first place? Very important to understand, because the journey to Alzheimer's, the journey to diabetes, the journey to heart disease is not the same. Okay, so understand why you got sick in the first place. And then by understanding that, you can use genetics to get insight about how to treat, really personalized treatment for that chronic disease. So that's bucket 3. Bucket 4 is sport and exercise. So we all have different potential in our training. We all thrive doing different kinds of exercises. We all recover from training in different ways. We all get injured in different ways. So that's another way we can understand. So those are like the 4 buckets of who I recommend, which is basically when you cover those 4, it's like everyone, really. And then your other question, which was such an important question, is how do you evaluate? So there are about 300 to 400 genetic tests in the marketplace that you can order. And before I built 3x4 Genetics, in fact, the reason I built the 3x4 Genetics company was because I was so disillusioned by the genetic testing industry and what they were offering, both offering us, but also offering clinicians to use with their patients. It was just horrible, and it had become an absolute mess. So for me, 3x4 was about, how do you look at everything that we're doing badly in the industry and do it better? So some of the questions you want to ask when you're looking for a company is, the first thing is, who built the test? So most of the genetic tests in the industry are what I call the copy and paste companies. So they just take a report, they brand it, they copy it, and they send it out. So make sure that whatever company it is, they've got scientists, they've got clinicians, doctors, dietitians that are actually building the report. And it's not just another version of someone else's report. The second thing is privacy, confidentiality. What are they doing with the data? Are they selling the data? Now, 23andMe, we know sells data. They sell it to pharmaceutical companies. I personally don't have an issue with that. It's their business model. I think genetic data for drug...
23.
Yeah. I think using genetics for drug discovery is a really clever idea. I think it's going to generate some great insights, but you need to be comfortable with that. So understand what they're doing with your data. Are they destroying the DNA, or are they biobanking it? How are they saving the genetic information? Where is it being saved? Is it being saved outside the US? So these are the kind of questions you really want to ask. Where are they storing the reports? Are they storing reports? How are they delivering the report to you? Is it in an encrypted way? All these kind of questions. The third thing I would ask is, you want to see a sample report always of the company, and you want, so they must be transparent. What are the genes that they're testing? And you want to see the actual gene name and the spelling change, right? You don't just want to say, we do genetic testing. So transparency for me is really big deal. And lastly, what is the education and support and mentorship that is being offered by the company to help you navigate working with genetics and growing in this field and understanding it? So those are just like a few off the top of my head, but I think that kind of gives you a good sense of a starting point.
Definitely. Yeah. No, and it's so important with how many genetic tests there are available is to pick one that is high quality and that you can trust, and that they're not selling your DNA and doing all sorts of things that you don't feel comfortable with. So yeah, very important information. Could you share some practical examples or like any testimonies, success stories, case studies of where people have done genetic testing and then they've done things with from an epigenetic lens after they've received the results and then they have this transformation?
Oh, yes. Let me think of some good ones. Two come to mind. So one is migraines. So migraines are such a debilitating condition and so common. I'm always absolutely amazed how many people suffer from migraines. And the one thing we're learning about migraines is that there are multiple reasons that would land up why someone has a migraine. And we know hormones is one of them. That's probably one of the more obvious ones, but often there's less obvious. And so one of the great successes we've had with genetics is actually around migraines, because what happens is there's this molecule called histamine. And histamine is, I always describe it as, imagine a siren goes off there's a hurricane coming and the siren goes off and it's warning everyone, alarm, there's something bad coming. So histamine is that kind of molecule. When the histamine molecule is generated by the body, it sets off that big alarm system, and it goes, the immune system and inflammation all wakes up. So the interesting thing is our body is an enzyme that breaks down histamine, so we don't get false alarms happening. We only get that alarm happening when we really need it. We have a spelling change in our DNA that changes this enzyme. That means we can't break down histamine. So the histamine in our body stays high, and we're on alarm alert all the time. And when that happens, all kinds of things, all kinds of negative things can happen. One of which is headaches and migraines. Another is allergies. Another is gut. So by doing a genetic test, you can actually see if you've got the genetic spelling change, the SNP, to be able to effectively break down histamine, or you can't break down histamine. And if you're the one who has that spelling change and you can't break down histamine, what we need to do is now work on how do we remove, because you actually are eating foods that are high in histamine. And the problem with histamine is some of the healthiest foods that we eat are high in histamine. We think of avocado, we think of tomatoes, we think of fermented foods, kimchi. Anything fermented actually is high in histamine, some seafood, some fish. So we've had so much success with understanding individuals that are sensitive to histamine in terms of migraines and allergies, even gut, by being able to then remove histamine from the diet and absolutely resolve and cure kind of the migraines. So that's one example. I'm trying to think of, there's so many, I've got like going through my head. Hormones, oh my gosh. Genetics gives us insight into how we metabolize our hormones. Hormones go through like a process of metabolites, we call them. And there's some metabolites that are better for us than others. And it's these negative metabolites that actually cause all kinds of things. So it could be infertility, it could be terrible menstrual stuff, it could be perimenopause being absolutely insane. So by understanding our genetics, it gives us great insight into understanding our hormone metabolism. And when we do that, we can make such good decisions around how we manage hormones. Do we want to switch on? Remember, epigenetic, we can take certain supplements, eat certain foods to change the way our hormones are metabolized, to really optimize it instead of suffering so badly from the side effects. So hormones is another one. And I had another one I really wanted to talk about, mood, anxiety, depression. So one of the issues around, this will be the last example I give, that anxiety and depression is like endemic. It's, and this is like a post-COVID, like just, it's everywhere. And so we have these neurotransmitters in our brain, or brain messages, dopamine, serotonin, adrenaline, noradrenaline. And they basically govern our feelings and how we feel and our mood. And when they are dysregulated, they're not working well, often is where we manifest. And it could be anxiety, it could be depression, it could be ADD, ADHD, it could be OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, it could be PTSD, all these things. So what's so interesting about genes is by doing a genetic test, we can get really good insight into how the individual these mood molecules is the best way to describe them. So in some individuals, the enzyme is actually working so fast that it breaks down these mood molecules. So we end up with low levels of dopamine and serotonin, which are feel-good molecules, right? And so then we compensate by seeking out behaviors or foods that make us feel better. Carbs, sugar, sometimes overtraining and exercise, drugs, alcohol are all behaviors that we try switch on. But sometimes the genetics are telling us that we're actually not breaking down those molecules. And in fact, the levels in our body are high instead of low. So one of the problems that happens is everyone who's suffering from anxiety, depression will go to their doctor and get an SSRI, an antidepressant, which is feeding more serotonin into the system. But if you're an individual whose problem is that your levels are too high, which is manifesting in restlessness, anxiety, insomnia, and your practitioner gives you a serotonin drug, all they're doing is compounding the problem. And many individuals will actually feel worse on SSRI, and that's because, so genetics is so insightful to be able to understand, remember who you are and how you're responding. So there's just 3 examples.
Beautiful. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. And I love that you spoke into migraines and allergies and hormones, because those are 3 things that so many people deal with. I personally didn't deal with migraines ever. I think I've had 1 migraine in my life. And then I used to have really bad allergies. And that was a combination of like emotional repression along with the toxicity of the environment. And then also hormone health. There's so many women out there that deal with the high histamine levels, the hormone imbalances. And it's something that I struggled with also in the past as well. Genetic testing, very powerful. In terms of deciphering the, now speaking into genetics and then epigenetics, that conversation again. When somebody gets their genetic test, I feel it can be easy. I'm curious to hear your perspective on this, to live in a mindset of that genetic destiny, right? Of, okay, now that I took this test, it told me what I'm sensitive to or what I should be avoiding, etc. Now I'm going to live my life in a very obsessive way or in a very controlling way. How do you feel like that? Does that happen? Have you heard of that happen to people who do genetic tests?
Not so much, actually. I think because remember, the kind of genetics I do is not about disease risk. It's not about, I did a genetic test and your chances of cancer are X, Y, and Z. We don't do that. That's not the space we live in. So the only kind of, so you're getting information about yourself. Again, we're not predicting disease or diagnosing disease. You're only getting information about how you respond, how you live in the world. And so we find, and in fact, even the scientific literature has reported this, that the majority of individuals who do genetic tests are inspired to make healthy lifestyle changes and maintain those changes. So I don't think it's about an obsessiveness, because we're not, as I said, disease focused. We're not about, you're only going to make one change and you're going to eat broccoli for the rest of your life and that's all you're going to do. It's more about understanding who you are. Again, I keep on saying the same thing, and how to live your best life. And so I don't see a lot of what you're describing. I see more an empowerment of feeling empowered to make the right choices because you understand who you are. And so it seems to be more a empowerment to make behavioral changes in your life rather than a concern. And I think there are genetic tests out there that are different. They'll give you like, your chance of macular degeneration is 54%. We're not in that space. That's not what we do. So we always about, here's who you are, here's what you can do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a much better place to be working.
I agree. Yeah. Taking that really empowering lens. And I feel like it's easy for some people to see if someone in your family has cancer or has this intense illness, then looking at that and then being flushed with worry and being like, oh, this is in my genetics now and I have to do this. And that's why I'm such an advocate for reading our food labels and learning about our food in the grocery store. And we can prevent so much nowadays by simply removing seed oils from our life, mm-hmm. not consuming canola oil and all of these processed seed oils. And that can prevent Alzheimer's. That can be a step towards preventing Alzheimer's. So speaking into prevention, what do you feel like if you could name like a few things that someone can just do today to prevent, and obviously this is unique for everyone based on their genetic test, but what are some things, just easy health tips that people can do to prevent illness and disease?
Broccoli. So why? So let's have a genetic epigenetic conversation around broccoli. I have a swimsuit that's got broccoli all over it. That's how passionate I feel about broccoli. So let's talk about genetics. So we have genes that have spelling changes, SNPs, that change the way, well, a couple of things. But the most important thing I want to talk about is detoxification. So we are exposed to all these toxins in our environment, the food we eat, in the air, in the water, and just a million things, right? And our body is responsible for getting that toxin and getting it out the body as quick as possible. And it's a process. There's a whole lot of genes, a whole lot of enzymes that play a role in how we manage toxins. But there is a family of genes called the GST genes that are really important on clearing toxins from the body. And when you have a spelling change in those genes, they're not as good at clearing toxins from the body. So we do a genetic test and we find out, detox is an area I really need to focus on. I need to improve the way I manage toxins. Genetics gave me insight into how I manage toxins. Now we are going to make a decision on how to improve that. We're going to make an epigenetic decision, actually, because when I eat broccoli and cauliflower and cabbage, but I'm going to talk about broccoli or broccoli sprouts because they're the winner, right? They're the top of the totem. They are really the best. When I eat a broccoli salad that's raw, I have to say the broccoli needs to be raw, and I chew my broccoli, I have to chew my broccoli, I am releasing the most beautiful molecule called sulforaphane. So this molecule, sulforaphane, which you might have heard about, doesn't actually exist in nature. In broccoli, the molecule that lives is called glucoraphanin. When I chew on my broccoli, the glucoraphanin combines with an enzyme called myrosinase and forms this magical process of generating this sulforaphane. And I've said before that sulforaphane for me is the greatest molecule of the century. And here's why. When I generate sulforaphane, it is epigenetic. It switches on genes. So the first thing it can do is it can switch on these detoxification genes that I need switched on, because I had the spelling change. They're not working so well. I eat broccoli, I generate sulforaphane, and it upregulates. It switches on detox genes to help me clear toxins from my body. But here's why it's the best molecule of the century, is because it doesn't only switch on detox genes. So there is a concept in biology called transcription factors. And I describe transcription factors as multi-switches. So I walk into my house and I switch on a light in the entrance hall, and my light in the entrance hall goes on. That's like sulforaphane switching on a detox gene. That's great. I've now got light in my entrance hall. But some of us, I don't, but some people do, where they walk into their house, they switch on one light and a whole bunch of lights in the house go on. So it's like a multi-switch. So a transcription factor is a multi-switch. When you switch it switches on lots of genes. So we have this transcription factor in our body called NRF2. And it's so powerful that if I can switch on that multi-switch, it's going to switch on around 500 genes. And those 500 genes are all protective. They decrease inflammation, they increase detox, they decrease oxidative stress, they improve methylation. Like everything good that can happen in our body happens when we switch on NRF2. So it's more powerful to switch on NRF2 than to switch off this gene, switch on that gene and that gene, right? So how do we switch on NRF2? There's a whole lot of foods we eat that can switch on NRF2, but the most powerful by far is sulforaphane. So when you eat cruciferous vegetables, broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, you are switching on this multi-switch NRF2, which is switching on 100 defense genes to help you heal and be healthy. So that is a perfect example of probably a longer answer than you were looking for, but a perfect example of this yin yang of genetics and epigenetics.
Wonderful. Everyone, do you hear that? Eat more broccoli, cauliflower, and cabbage if you want to live a healthier, more vibrant, longer quality of life.
And broccoli sprouts. I actually went to the supermarket the other day and I saw you could actually get broccoli sprouts. You can grow them yourself. I'm terrible. I can't do that. I can't grow sprouts. I can't grow anything actually, but you can buy broccoli sprouts, and they actually are the most potent. So that broccoli sprouts grow into grown-up broccoli. And as they grow up to grown-up broccoli, they dilute how much of that glucoraphanin is. But broccoli sprouts are still got all the magic in. So broccoli sprouts are actually the winner. And if you just take those and you sprinkle them on a salad, amazing.
They're so good. They're so good on everything. Yeah. Farmers market, growing your own food. Like I'm half Polish, so I spent a lot of my time in Poland. I would fly to Poland every summer since I was 6 months old to visit my grandparents, and they grew a garden completely from scratch. So I was like picking carrots and cutting beans and picking cherries, and it's just beautiful to be immersed in that at a very young age, you know? And then also having I wanted to actually work for Pfizer at a point. Like I wanted to pursue being an anesthesiologist. And then I had my own health challenges in 2020. And that I started just having an awakening. I was like, oh, there has to be like a natural way for me to heal myself. And then got off of SSRIs and all of that stuff as well. And now I haven't really been sick in the last 4 years, and I have a very strong immune system, and I'm so grateful. And the majority of my family members they've either passed away or they're dealing with some sort of chronic illness or disease. So also just a shout out like to mom, like this episode is devoted to you.
Dedicated to mom this episode.
Yeah, exactly. So finishing off, I would love to hear, what do you envision as the future of the genetic-based health interventions?
Look, so I think, first of all, personalized health, personalized nutrition, whatever you want to call it, is the future. Like, we cannot carry on in the way that we have. We are completely unsuccessful in addressing disease. So the only way we're going to be successful is understanding who our patient is, who we are, and targeting and creating a personalized thing. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, when I became a dietitian, there was no epigenetic conversation. So when we used nutrition, I always say we use nutrition to plug holes. I'm not getting enough vitamin C, so I'm going to eat foods that are high in vitamin C. But there was no concept of the true power of nutrition. So this idea that food is medicine did not appear in my dietetics degree anywhere. And so it's taken me 20 years to figure out, actually, food is medicine. And so I think that this genetic epigenetic conversation is redefining medicine and nutrition, not just nutrition, redefining medicine. Because when you can change gene expression, it's way more powerful than a drug. And in fact, what happens with drugs, so we talk about this concept of activation versus modulation. Drugs are a sledgehammer, right? They go into the body and they knock the hell out of that enzyme because that enzyme is causing problems. Epigenetics, when we use nutrition, diet, lifestyle, exposure, cold water, all these wonderful things, meditation, we are modulating the gene. And the gene is healing us. The enzyme is healing us. So this is why nutrition and lifestyle are finally finding their place as medicine, because when we can support our body to heal itself, and we also know who we are, so we know where to focus that intervention, I think we're redefining medicine and health. And I really believe that we will hit to a time where every single individual will have a genetic test. It will not be an issue. It'll be done as young as possible. And all clinical decisions for that individual will be made through the lens of genetics and epigenetics.
I stand right beside you for the vision of that future. And I believe that it also starts in the school system and education around this with the younger generation, which is the future generation of who's going to be running this planet. So
my son is 11, and I was invited to come and speak to his class. That was super fun, trying to do a school lesson on genetics and epigenetics and nutrition. And he was like, Mom, you do understand they're only 11. They don't understand the stuff your grown-ups are. But they understood. They totally got it. And I think that we need to be having these conversations.
Yeah, definitely. And where can everyone find you? Tell us how we can find your genetic testing as well. I'll probably just link a code and a link for you guys downstairs in the show notes as well. So yeah,
it's really simple. It's the 3x4 genetics, the number 3, letter X, number 4 genetics.com, 3x4genetics.com, and you'll get all the information on the website. There's videos. I've done a lot of videos, like answering questions that I get. So you should be able to find everything there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate this lovely conversation. Mom, I know you're going to listen to this, so thanks for listening, everyone. And I will see you in the next episode.
Okay. Thank you, Daria.